Can we see your face for a minute?
Okay. Where am I now?
Emily, how do you pronounce your surname?
Mohajane, they've spelled it incorrect. It's supposed to be Mohajane.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense. Okay. Thank you. Hi,
Are you able to
Janice.
see my face? Oh, okay.
There you go. Hi, Janice.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So listen,
Janice,
let's get
can
going.
we see your face for a minute just to say hello?
Okay.
Hi,
There you are.
Janice.
Hi, Janice.
Hi.
Hello.
Great.
Hello.
Cool.
Okay, I think both of you are looking at the practitioner designation, so I'll use that as our example as we go through it. So I'm going to share screen and just take you through. Janice, I think you probably made quite a lot of progress, so this might all be relatively familiar to you, but maybe there'll still be some questions that it will answer. Okay, so let's get on with it. Okay, so has that come up for everyone?
Not yet. Yes.
Okay, cool. So the intention here is really just to give you a briefing on how to put together your portfolio. So
Okay.
as we go through, when you've got questions, please just let me know and let's discuss it at the time. So firstly, I don't know if you're aware, but we have had an earlier process and we've revised it recently. So what you guys are working on is our revised process. Our reason was that our earlier process was quite cumbersome and difficult to evaluate. Cumbersome for you to complete as a candidate and difficult for us to evaluate. In addition, since we had developed that original process, several other professional bodies have also come online and we've been able to benefit from listening to what other people do, and that's helped us refine the process. So now we believe the process is more focused and simpler. At the same time, we've done some work on harmonizing the 3 designations that we're responsible for and the descriptions of the designations. And the harmonizations are now with SAC. We're waiting on them to be ratified, but you will be working with the updated versions. That's what we've sent you. So essentially, what does our new process focus on? So if you look at a designation description as it's listed, you'll see that there is a competency description in each of our designations. And what we're wanting you to do then is to focus on those, and it's against those that you're going to be evaluated. What we've done in our workbook, you'll see, is we've suggested some activities that might be examples of each of those competencies, and I'll have a look at them when we get to look at the guideline document. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that our logic is that we want to know from your past experience whether you've ever showed evidence against a competency description, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But essentially, if you've done any recruitment selection, you'll know that the principle of the past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. That's the logic that we're using. So we're saying that if you've been competent in the past against an element in the designation description, tell us about it, because that will convince us that you'll be able to do it in the future. And then you must just back it up with some evidence to show that you're actually not spinning a line, but you actually have done that. And the evidence must meet VARC's requirements. Emily, Janice, are either of you an assessor or a moderator?
I'm a registered assessor. I once assessed, but it's been a while.
Been a while. Okay,
Yes.
but then you're familiar with the assessment requirements. It's the same thing.
Yes.
Valid, all those things. We'll talk about that. Janice,
Yes.
Yeah. I'm an assessor with EDDP, ASDSA, Services CETA. So
you're very familiar. You're very familiar.
Yes.
Cool. And the last thing that we've done is we've amended our designation descriptions to move away from being very, very specific about the background qualification you have, and rather to make it a more general requirement. In other words, a cognate qualification. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. And a cognate qualification, here we're merely saying that there's a specified minimum level and a minimum number of credits, and as long as it's in an interrelated field, it will be acceptable. So let's just talk about each of those in turn. Firstly, here's what the revised designation description looks like. So let's just go through it because I think it's relevant to each of you. Firstly, right at the top, it speaks about a cognate level 5 qualification with a minimum of 120 credits in an area related to education training, HRD, HR, or business consulting and advising. So cognate meaning that it's in that field. Cognate is quite a well used word by SAQA. I think I've got a note here. So here, what is a cognate qualification? So I first found a reference to it in SAQA documents in 2007. That's on the right-hand side, and it's in one of the government gazettes. And essentially what it is, refers to courses in the same or related discipline or specialization. The disciplines, branches of study or learning that are considered commonly defined at the program level for the purpose of assessing applicants for recognition of prior learning. Okay, so that's what it essentially means, as long as it's in a related field. Okay, then your requirement is that you must have working experience in the field. And here we've said at least 5 years, okay, in the field. And so, for example, your CV will tell us that. Then you must give us evidence of successful implementation of planned learning and development strategies linked to what the organization is trying to achieve. And that could be just an internal document, or it could be, for example, your mandatory grant report also fulfills that requirement. And then we want a recommendation by a supervisor, manager, client regarding your competence in this field. Okay. And then the designation competencies. So there are 5 for the practitioner designation. And essentially what we want you to do is to show us evidence that you are able to develop and maintain a skills development and training strategy, that you can facilitate implementation of a strategy, that you can maintain a quality management system, that you can facilitate career development, and that you can provide business performance consulting and advising for appropriate skills development strategies. Now, those are kind of mainstream for a skills development professional. So if you think back over your working history, you are quite likely to be able to think of examples from your working history for each of these. If I can ask you just to spend a moment thinking about that. If, for example, you take the first one, second one, facilitate implementation of a skills development and training strategy. Can you think of an example from your past experience that you could tell us about that will give you, that'll be an illustration of that? So take a moment to think about it, and then I'll ask for some feedback. Janice, do you have something that comes to mind?
Yes, I've worked on numerous projects. Okay, for example, I do skills audits. I've done 2 skills audit processes, and out of those skills audit processes, I've done a gaps analysis. Okay, one for Sikakuni District Municipality and one for the Amatole District Municipality, which have over 1,000 employees, for example. So I've done that with regards to obviously looking at personal development plans as well. And then I've been involved with National Treasury on the infrastructure skills development grant program that we basically managed for about, I think, 10 years in the Eastern Cape province, looking after 5 municipalities. So that is basically putting together a framework for the professional development processes of unemployed graduates. So the municipalities would do scarce skills analysis, and the National Treasury would fund them to employ unemployed graduates, either depending on the electrical field, civil technicians, technologists, engineers, civil electrical, your GIS professions, your quantity surveyors. So all your kind of infrastructure professionals.
It sounds like amongst those projects that you've worked on, you'll certainly be able to pick up some where you've developed a strategy and other examples where you've facilitated implementation. That sounds good.
And frameworks, yes.
And Emily?
From my side, I did a skills development gap analysis for the drivers from FH Chamberlain, my previous employer. I had to involve a lot of training in between after I identified the problems, including the R2 role, say road McKinsey, sort of being a refresher course, and arrange a competition at the end of the year to see. However, we were just the spectators, say as FH Chamberlain staff members. I had to look for the traffic officers, see, and to conduct the whole competition for the whole drivers within the company. So we had to identify specific gaps and how many drivers were involved in an accident, how many received the tickets based on the R2, what are the consequences based on that, how can we close this gap, how are they going to, the R2 system going to reduce their points based on the driver's license. So we also had to do the customer service because they deal with that, how to manage anger and the frustrations in between. And there was a lot of information and to take them for a defensive driving courses. And I've also done the IDP with the engineers that I'm working with currently.
It sounds to me like both of you got a lot of examples.
Yes.
You can use. So that's good. Okay, that's cool. All right, so some more background things. So we've looked at the qualifications just regarding if you don't have a relevant qualification, we can take you through an RPL exercise for the qualification element. Do either of you not have a cognate qualification? Are you both good?
I have an OD ETDP from UJ. I must just check if it's linked to this one.
Yeah, that should be satisfactory. Janice, are you good?
I've got a higher diploma in education, and then I'm an associate, a professional associate HR practitioner.
The level of your diploma is what, level 5?
Is it? Let me check. What one you're talking about now? The diploma, the higher diploma.
I've lost you there. Oh, we've lost Janice. Okay, hopefully she'll come back. All right, when she comes back, we can just check in with her. There's Janice. Okay. Janice, sorry, we lost you there.
Andy, she still needs to connect her audio, so she's not able to hear you yet.
Okay, can she hear us yet? Maybe not.
No, it looks like she might be having some tech issues.
Okay, well, we can come back and check that with her at a later time. So now Janice, I think, is quite far down the track.
Sorry, I had network problems. I see I'm reconnected now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So do you think you've got at least a level 5 qualification amongst what you've got?
INCEF level 6.
You got 6, then you're good. Okay. So look, there are 2 key documents that you're going to work with. The first is a guideline document, and we'll spend some time looking at that now. And that really contains the instructions that you need to follow to put your portfolio together. And the second document is the workbook. Now that's in Word, and the intention there is that's where you can record the evidence that you're going to give us. the stories, the examples you're going to give us, plus you can link it into the evidence. Okay. Here, now essentially what you then do is that you will fill in the workbook and you'll submit it to us electronically. We'll send you a link to the Dropbox folder that you need to use. Please keep a close record of that link, because it needs to go into a very specific link in Dropbox so that we can access it properly. But you'll get an email from Angelique with that link. And please don't delete the email. Keep it, because you must keep using that link. So what you'll then do is you'll upload your completed workbook and the supporting evidence to back up your example. When you are recording evidence, please, there's a few guidelines that we would like you to follow. Please, can you make sure that each piece of evidence is a separate document, because it becomes very difficult to find for the evaluator. If, for example, if you've got 25 documents all in one PDF folder, or one PDF file, that's difficult. So make sure each of them is a separate PDF. Secondly, it's all electronic, so we don't take any hard copy evidence. Typically, it's in a PDF. Your evidence is probably going to be submitted in PDF. But, we do have the capacity to pick up pictures if there's something that, or some sort of visual material or a video or an auditory file. We can also look at that sort of evidence. Please also make sure that each piece of evidence that you give us has got a unique name, so it's easier for us to find. And you'll see that what we've asked you to do in the workbook is, at the start of the workbook, just to make a list of every piece of evidence that you're going to submit. And then when you come to an example, list the evidence again, but just the evidence that's relevant to that example, just to make the evaluation process run more smoothly. Okay. So first step is, and I think you guys have done it, is you need to look at the designation description and choose one of the designations as the appropriate one. Then review the guidelines and identify the example you want to include in your portfolio. And we'll have a look at those in a moment. The evaluator will then, when we get your portfolio, we'll go through it. The evaluator will, much like an assessor, will look to see whether there's sufficient evidence. Does it meet the rubric? And we'll look at the rubric now. And you will get both written and verbal feedback from your evaluator. The issue is, and it's different to assessing. Assessing, you have a learner who's working against a very finite. They usually have a learner guide. They've got specific learning material. And you've given them specific exercises that they need to complete. But for Angelique, is there an extra person coming online?
Not supposed to be today, but this is Nirvana joining us a tad bit late.
Okay. Hi, Nirvana, welcome.
Hi.
We have got quite a long way through.
Okay.
So I hope you can, I hope it's not confusing for you. We can always pick it up again with you at a later time.
Okay.
We're currently looking at the evaluation process and what happens once you submit your portfolio. And essentially what happens is the evaluator will look at it and will give you feedback on it. We know that differently to assessing learning, where they'll have learning material and you'll give them a specific task to do. If you're trying to develop evidence out of your working experience, it's often very hard to do that. And so one of the things that our evaluators will do is they will give you feedback on what's missing, and you get a second chance to submit evidence if you're missing something. So for example, we've said to you, give us an example and make sure that you give us enough detail in the example. You may find that they'll come back to you and they'll say, listen, I understand this bit, but this other bit here, can you explain it a bit more clearly? And I'll give you guidelines as to what they're looking for. Or they might say to you, can you give me some more compelling evidence? It's all circumstantial what you've given me. So for example, if you've used a mandatory grant report, you said, okay, I've submitted the mandatory grant report for my organization. They might come back to you and say, yes, but was it accepted by the CETA? Can you rather give us the confirmation from the CETA that it was acceptable? So that's the sort of information or the feedback that they're likely to give you. They'll guide you as to what you still must supply to them if it's missing. And as I said, you'll get a second chance then to submit additional evidence in your portfolio. And that's usually sufficient for most of the candidates coming through. If you need a third round of evaluation, it's also possible, but there will be an additional charge for that. You know, our current costing provides for one round of evaluation plus a remedial evaluation. That's what we're paying our evaluators to do. And if you want to do a third round of evaluation, obviously we're going to pay them some more. So that's why there are additional costs. And what the evaluator does is then it passes on, the evaluator passes on a recommendation to the verifier. So similarly to an assessment process where you've got an assessor and a moderator, we have an evaluator and a verifier. And the verifier does what a moderator does. They will look at what the evaluator has done and they'll give feedback to the evaluator if they think it's something is inappropriate. Once both the evaluator and the verifier are comfortable, they then make a final recommendation to our certification committee, and that's the group that makes the final call. So the certification committee meets monthly to finalize any of the evaluations. Okay, makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah, cool, cool. Now, how does the evaluator do that job? So this is the evaluation rubric in its simplest form for all of our designations. So you'll see that what we want you to do and what are the instructions to you as the candidate is the elements in black. We said to you, if you think back to the designation competency, we want you to think of an example where you've shown that you are competent. We'll say to you, and if you think back to the examples, Emily and Janice, you had a chance earlier on to think about examples from your work history. Think back to one of those examples that you might use to motivate that you get a designation. We're going to say to you, what is the example that you will use for this particular competency? And please describe the circumstances surrounding the example, the context or the situation where this example arose. So you might be saying, I am the skills development facilitator. So that's my job. And I'm required to submit the mandatory grant reports every year. So that's my brief. And there I've described the circumstances. And this particular example I want to use is the mandatory grant report that was due by end of April 2021. Okay. Then the second question to you is, how does your action in this situation show your competence? So we ask you to describe the role you played or what action you took in the situation and give enough information so that it is clear what you personally did. Okay, so I might then say, so I'm the SDF designated. I collated the information necessary for the mandatory grant report by contacting my human resource colleagues and by contacting for copies of invoices and contacting the line managers for performance development plans and for also HR for the training records. And I use that to gather data for submission. I then analyzed that data in a spreadsheet and drew out the tables that was required by the CETA. I then uploaded the information onto the CETA system, drew down a draft report, took that draft report to the training committee, who then evaluated, asked questions, and then confirmed and signed it off. And then I, on that sign off, I then submitted it on the CETA system. So there I'm describing what I actually did. And you'll see that in red are the requirements that the evaluator will be looking for. So here, award 1 point if this example is relevant to the competency, and award 1 point if there's good and clearly defined evidence of the role played by the candidate. So you'll see in the description I've given you, the role played by the candidate is clearly described. There will be 2 points there. And just to go back to the previous one, I forgot to mention it. You get a point if you give a clear and unambiguous information about context. Then the third question we ask you to explain is, why is this a good example of your competence? Okay, so describe the outcome of your actions and all the results obtained because of your actions. Explain why you believe this is good evidence of your personal competence. So here, I would then say, in answer to this, well, I submitted it to the CETA and I had confirmation back from the CETA that this was accepted. I also had notes from our training committee meeting that they had accepted the plan. So the two parties that need to sign off, the CETA and the company, have both signed off. So that's why I believe it is a good example of my competence against facilitating implementing designing and developing a training strategy. So you get 1 point if there is a successful outcome, and you get another point if it shows your competence against a particular competency description. So you get 2 points. So essentially you can get 5 points. You should be getting 5 points if you've given a good and clear description of this example. Then lastly, what the evaluator will want to see is, so can you confirm, can you prove that this actually happened? And then the last question, what evidence can you provide that confirms your role or your actions and the outcomes of your action? And here we will want you to list the document names of the evidence you provided that confirms your competence. So the evidence is probably going to be things like, certainly I would like to see a sign-off from the CETA, and I'd like to see a confirmation from the business that it was accepted, typically the training committee report, where they confirmed that it was a good report and they would like it to be submitted to the CETA. So that would be good evidence that it was, that I did it and that it was successfully accepted by the various parties. And this evidence must then meet VARC's requirements. If it doesn't, then you won't get any points. Now, what your evaluator is likely to do is they will give you feedback if any of the first 3 questions are not clear. That's number 1. And they'll ask you to expand on what you've told them. Or they might say, look, the evidence isn't, we need more evidence. Can you give me something like this? And for example, some of the things they often do, because you might have done something 2 or 3 years ago and you didn't keep sufficient evidence at the time because it didn't seem necessary at that point. You might need to go away and ask for somebody to give you a testimonial to confirm that stuff. So it's also acceptable evidence. So does that make sense how the evaluation process is going to work? Emily, Janice, Nirvana? Any questions or comments?
I think from my side, most of the evidence that I have would be final reports that are submitted to the client, and the evidence in terms of whether they've accepted that would be the invoice that they would pay us. So most of the evidence would be final reports or final presentations that is being done to the client.
So look, excuse me, those things are good evidence of the results that you, sorry, now I've got a tickle, that you did the work, that they paid the invoice is reasonable evidence that they like the outcome, but you might want to build it by some sort of a testimonial. Sometimes you get a letter back that says, yes, we like it, thank you very much. That's stronger evidence that they were satisfied. People sometimes pay an invoice just to get rid of you.
Okay.
And then they never use you again. So
yeah, not in this case, but yes. So I do have correspondence, obviously, between myself and the client wanting the final reports and things like that. So obviously what I would also do is try then and go back and get them to wherever I've submitted final reports that they just said that they've accepted it.
Okay, that's powerful stuff if you can get that. So look out for things like that. You know, and I think the trick with evidence is not that you have lots and lots of evidence, rather that you have relevant evidence. So try and keep your evidence as limited as possible, but relevant. Because you don't want to make your evaluator wade through loads and loads of stuff that actually doesn't talk to what they have to use as their rubric. Okay, so try and keep it as focused as you possibly can. Emily, what are you thinking? Is it clear what you need to be doing here?
Yes, it's clear. It's clear.
Okay. Nirvana, I know you came in late, so I'm not sure if this is making sense yet.
Yes, no, it is.
Okay, great. All right. A few more things to tell you, and then we can have a look at the guideline document and the workbook. How long does it take? So today's the briefing, okay? Then our experience is that actually putting your workbook together probably doesn't take you more than a couple of weeks. For example, we've had people who've sat down over a weekend and thought about the examples and written up the examples. Okay. And then they need to go and get the substantiating evidence, and that's what the thing that might take a bit more time, because you put it together, you're going to go and delve it out of wherever you've stored it. That can take a day or so. But then if you look at it and you decide that you need to get more evidence, and for example, if you want to get a testimonial, that's when you probably need a bit more time. But actually 2 weeks, if you put your mind to it, you should be able to get the evidence in within about 2 weeks. We give you longer. Okay. But my suggestion to you is to put it as a focus and get it done in one go if you possibly can. Otherwise, you'll find that it lingers, and you've got to try and remember what you were looking for and what you'd asked for. The longer you leave it, I think it gets harder. Once we get your portfolio in and it's completed, our evaluators have a 2-week timeline to look at it, give you feedback, and then deal with any remedial issues that need to be addressed. Okay. Once they're happy and they pass it on to verify, a week there, and then, as I say, the final decision is made by the certification committee that meets monthly. So in a sense, this could be tackled, could be dealt with from A to Z in about a month. That's the sort of timeline that you can set yourself. And please, I encourage you to do that. Anything else I need to tell you? We've got some technical details that I don't know that we need to spend too long on. This is just a comment on the difference between assessment and evaluation, and I've spoken a bit about it, but it is useful to just spend a moment thinking about it. When you're assessing, you're trying to find, there's a focus on the qualification, there's a focus on knowledge and application of knowledge. And really, as an assessor, you're finding, you want to just show that somebody's learned how to do it. If they can give you one example, it's enough. Okay, they've learned it. Whereas with evaluating for a portfolio, you're looking for consistent good performance. Okay? It's an RPL exercise where you're wanting to find examples out of somebody's past history that they've consistently been able to do something well, and they can provide you with evidence to back it up. And we know that it's often hard to find naturally occurring evidence. That's a reality, because as we said, time has gone by. So it's important then that our evaluators guide you as to what they're looking for. And if you're giving them something that doesn't quite meet requirements, they will guide you as to what you need to do. And so testimonials often play a part in this process because you don't have other naturally occurring evidence. And by the way, if you want to get a testimonial, my suggestion to you is that you draft it for the person who is going to give you the testimonial, to make sure that you're specific about what you want them to confirm. And they're not going to sign it if it's not true. So I don't think you are leading them by the nose. I think you must be very clear as to what you want them to confirm, and ask them to be honest and to provide you with to only sign off if they're comfortable that it's true. We often, by the way, do some checking of this sort of evidence. And lastly, then, what we're looking for is that there's some consistency, that you've shown consistent good performance over multiple instances. So those are our guidelines that we're looking, that we apply looking at a portfolio. This I'm not really going to go through because I've got some other documents that we can look at. This one here is our brief, and if you want a copy of this, we'll send it to you. But essentially, the key thing is you need to submit your workbook to us as a Word document. When the evaluator evaluates it, they will make notes on it, on the Word document, but then they'll save it as a PDF, and that then is our snapshot of the first evaluation. If they want additional evidence, they're going to ask you to use the same Word document and add to it. But then whatever you add in, do it in a different color. So that's when we can, it becomes very clear what's remedial stuff, and so on and so forth. So the Word document remains all the way through as a working document. But at every step of the way, the evaluator will do a PDF to do a snapshot. So if there's remedial, and they review remedial evidence, and they make notes in your workbook, they'll do it in a different color, and then they'll do a PDF of the remedial, so that we have a series of snapshots as you go through the process. And similarly, the verifier will also work on that basis. So you'll see the different colors are indicated there. Right. Can we have a look at the guideline docs? I'm comfortable to move on. Okay, cool. Silence suggests consent. Pressing on. If you need us to link anywhere, you must just tell me, please. Right, so this is the guideline for the skills development practitioner. I think you all have seen it. So I'm just going to go through it and highlight some issues that I think back up the things that we've spoken about. And I hope you don't get motion sick as I flick through this. Okay, so there's the index. And this, I think, is large enough for you to see. Everybody see? Okay. The designation requirements we've already spoken about. The steps to be followed, I think you've seen. How will your performance, your portfolio be evaluated? Here are some examples of typical cognate qualifications. It says that if you don't have a cognate qualification, we do have an RPO process for you. This sits in your in the designation description. Some comments about your CV. So we want a copy of your CV, and I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so this is what you're being evaluated against, and the minimum requirements. So let's spend a minute just thinking about that. So the requirement is that you must provide evidence against at least 75% of the designation competencies above. And there are 5 of them. So that means that you must provide evidence against at least 4 of the 5 designation competencies. Okay. And that translates into at least 8 fit-for-purpose examples. And the period in question must be over at least 5 years. So, you have to have this track record of success. So that's what you're targeting. You're trying to give us at least 8 examples that cover at least 4 of those 5 competencies. You could leave one out if you need to. We've also given you an outline of what the evidence of the requirements for the evidence. It must meet VARC's requirements, and the description is here. And I think you guys are familiar, so you know broadly what these mean. Okay. The questions we've spoken about already in the presentation. Okay, now let's look at the rubrics. So the guidelines that the evaluator uses are the bits in red. So firstly, qualifications. Must be a certified copy, and it must have been certified in the past 6 months. It must be at the right level, must have the minimum number of credits, and it must be in a field that's relevant. So that's what they're looking at. Then your CV. The CV must at least 5 years, must show at least 5 years in the fields of business consulting or skills development. Okay. And in your CV, make sure that it gives us enough detail You know, sometimes a CV just says, it gives you a title of, I was responsible for training and I was responsible for this, that, just single word answers. That doesn't really help provide enough of a context for the evaluator. So you might need to expand the wording. What the evaluator is going to look for is, can we see a position title? Can we see the dates? Can we see enough information about your job responsibility to understand what processes and results you're responsible for? So that's an area that you might need to expand on if it's not sufficiently clear. And who the employers were. It must include contact details of the most recent employer, because again, you might need to do some reference checking. And the job responsibilities must be relevant to the competencies in the designation. So that's what the evaluator is looking for. And I think that's probably fairly self-evident. Okay, the experiential learning, that's part of the designation description. So it's about submission of evidence of successful implementation. If the evidence is of successful implementation, then there must be confirmation from at least one person responsible for implementing those strategies. Now that could be a client, it could be a senior person in the organization. It's typically a credible person who's probably senior. And we're wanting them to confirm that they've accepted, that the strategies were accepted by the organization, and that there is a sufficient link with the business objectives. And that's particularly important because sometimes the training department goes off on its own tangent and there's no strong line of sight to what the business is trying to achieve. So we want to know, somebody needs to say to us, yes, these are in line with what the business is trying to do. So the statement of this effect must be signed by the person responsible for implementation, and that will be sufficient evidence. If the evidence includes 2 workplace skills plans, there must be confirmation from the relevant CETA and from the organization that the plans were acceptable. Okay. Then the recommendation by the supervisor, manager, client must be signed by someone senior to the candidate or by the client if it's an independent SDF. And it must confirm, in the opinion of this person, that the candidate is competent against at least 4 of the 5 designation competencies. So you're probably going to need, that's why I say you probably need to draft it, and you probably need to list those competencies that you want them to confirm. Does it make sense? You happy?
Yes.
Cool. Then so you're now going to develop some examples. You're going to take one of them. And I think this is familiar with you. So this is what the evaluator will actually mark. So where it says candidate explanation, that's where you'll give your example. That you'll put your comments in. Then the evaluator feedback, the rubric is there. They will, in this case, they will be giving their own feedback against each of those, and they will be allocating a point. So that's for question 1. You'll see the same as for question 2. You see the guidelines there and what they will use to decide how many points to give. Question 3. Okay, guidelines are there. And then the evidence submitted. Okay, total number of points allocated, the maximum of 5. And then the evidence. And again, we've included some examples to guide the evaluator. Could include minutes of meetings if the role played by the candidate is clearly described in the minutes. So, for example, we see minutes where you can see that the candidate is a participant in the meeting, but it's not clear what role they actually played in the meeting. That's not going to help you. You need to get something that's more specific, that explains what role you actually played in the meeting. Because as you know, I mean, sometimes people are just passengers in the meeting. They don't actually play an active role. They're not driving the meeting. So we want to clearly see that what role you played in that meeting. Could include a testimonial, and that's often the case. You might have meeting minutes, but it's not clear what role you played, even if you were very active. And that's why testimonials can often play a very big role in confirming what you did. Okay. So it could be a testimonial, it could be a confirmation from senior management, a receiver, or a client, of the role and a successful outcome. Again, the issue here is not lots of evidence, it's rather relevant evidence. So if you can keep it simple, that is much better to work with. Okay, so what the evaluator will do is they'll look at the first three questions, they'll determine whether your role is clearly described by how many points they've allocated to a maximum of 5. And if they don't have less than 5, they're going to come back to you and say, please expand this. And if they don't have 5, then 5 points allocated, then this is not an example that can count towards your competence. So that's really important. So once they're very clear, once it's very clear what role you played, they'll then say, okay, does the evidence actually back this up? Can we confirm that this is sufficient? And if the evidence is clear and the example is clear, then they will say, yes, we either accept or we don't accept this example. Okay. Right. There is an appeal process that is to be followed. So if you submit your portfolio, the evaluator looks at it, the first person you will then check whether the evaluator has done a good job is the verifier. Okay. If the verifier and the evaluator both agree, but you don't like the result, you then have recourse. Okay. And you can then make an appeal against the evaluation. So you'd write to the certification committee and saying, listen, they've not recommended me, but I think that's wrong. What the ASDSA will then do is appoint a new evaluator and and you will go through the evaluation process again. If the new evaluator upholds the previous evaluation, then you must actually pay for the new process. If they overturn the previous evaluation, then the ASDSA will pay for that cost. But there is an appeal process for you to follow. Okay. All right. So I think most of the stuff that we've spoken, or that is covered here, we've spoken about. Here's just an example of how you might number or name your evidence. So we strongly suggest that for your evidence, that you give each piece of evidence a unique number, a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and then you give a description against that. So it becomes very easy for both you and the evaluator to pick out the evidence that's relevant. And I spoke about saving it in a separate file. Then there are a couple of appendices that can help you. And I'm going to talk about each of them in turn. So the designation description you've seen there, we've spoken about. The OFO codes, we did an exercise a little while ago to say, well, which jobs link most easily with our designations? And we said, if the link between a job is clear and a designation, we'll put that in green. If it's less obvious, it's yellow. But for example, if you are looking for a master, in fact, let's go to the practitioner designation. So if you have any of these job OFO codes or job titles, you're probably looking at a practitioner designation. So if you've been an education and training quality assurance manager, or education and training advisor, or reviewer, skills development practitioner, training analyst, these are OFO codes. Are probably you should be looking at a practitioner designation. There's some in yellow here. So here, if you were a community development practitioner, depending on what your job responsibilities were, it might be the case that you looking at a practitioner designation. Your best route, of course, is to look at the designation description and say, and look at the designation competencies and ask your question, do I actually have experience and have I been successful in meeting these competency requirements? That's your best test. Then the last appendix in here is just to help you identify examples. So say, for example, the designation competency number A of develop and maintain organization skills development and training strategy. Here's a list of activities that you might have been involved in. And this may stimulate you to think about, oh, I never thought I could use that as an example. So just scan down here. Nirvana, I'm not sure which designation you're looking at. This might or might not be relevant to you. This is the practitioner guideline document. But that's the purpose of these, is to help you think about, if I've done these, then maybe I can use an example. And it should stimulate you to think of examples. And so we've got, this is the competency A, this competency B, and so on and so forth. They're all the way through. Can I move on to look at the workbook? Everybody comfortable that I do that? Okay.
Yes.
And the workbook is here.
No.
Okay. So this is the workbook that you need to complete, and it remains the working document all the way through. You will fill in your information at the top. The ASDSA will fill in the evaluator, verify, all those details there. Here's a contents list. You've seen this before, designation requirements. Okay, list of evidence producers. Let me close some of these things. My assistant is shouting at me. I don't know why. Okay. So right at the start of your workbook, we suggest that you list, and we've helpfully given you a numbering. So list all of your evidence here, and obviously you must rename each piece of evidence to make sure it matches what you've got at your evidence list. Then you've seen this. So here's a place where you will give us, under qualifications, give us the name and number that you've given to your qualifications. So let's say you've got 2 qualifications. Number 1 might be a bachelor degree. Number 2 might be a diploma. So just list the evidence that you're submitting to substantiate that. The gray area, the evaluator make a comment on it. And on the right-hand side, the evaluator will say it's whether it's compliant or not. Then your CV, the number name of the file that you've used for your CV is there, and your evaluator comments. Then the submission of 2 approved plans or similar, and the evaluator comments, and the recommendation. So you're basically just listing here the evidence that you're submitting. And the evaluator will then go and look at it. And that's why it's important that it's very clearly named and numbered, that they can easily find it. Then you've seen this before. So competency A, example 1. So here you're saying, okay, I now need to write down the first example that I've got for develop and maintain organization skills development and training strategy. And you give your explanation for questions 1, 2, and 3 there in the areas in white. The evaluator will then be giving comment on each of those, and they'll be allocating points to each of those. Okay. And then they'll add up the points and give you total points. And if you've got 5, then you've given them enough explanation. And then you list the evidence. Now here you're listing just the evidence that's relevant to this particular example, not all of the evidence. Okay. And so on. Now you get a chance, there's an example 2 for competency A, and it's exactly the same story. Then it moves on to competency B, and here's now example 3. And competency B again, example 4. So you'll see it goes all the way through. Oh, there we go. All the way through. Okay, then there's a declaration of authenticity that we want you, and particularly at a practitioner level, often you're working with people in administration jobs who are doing a lot of the legwork for you. So they might be, for example, if you're this SDF, they might be gathering, getting copies of all of the invoices and recording that information onto a spreadsheet. They might be doing liaison work with training providers, putting together learning material, so there might be people who are doing a lot of the legwork for you. So what you're going to confirm here is not that you did everything yourself, but that you've been responsible for it. There's an extended candidacy option in here. So if, for example, you submit your portfolio and it's clear that you still need to get some more working experience, you just don't have enough working experience as yet, here's where the evaluator will discuss with you what you need to get, where you need to get more experience, and what you might do to do that. So, for example, if you lack experience, for example, in a quality management system, you really need to include that. Then you'll have a conversation around, well, if somebody else is responsible for the QMS in your organization, you can't just go and do that. You need to go and chat to the powers that be, your key contacts, to agree with them that as a project, you might become involved with the quality management system and maintaining it, and work out some sort of a timing, because the timing will then say, well, I need to spend about 3 months working on this. So I need to develop a plan that says between January and March next year, I'm going to work on this. So that means that only by April, May next year, will I be able to resubmit my portfolio with this additional information. So that's what that's all about. Anticipated completion date. It's there. Okay. The last bit here is what is not for you to do. It's where our evaluators will then summarize their discoveries. So the examples, you'll see it's either accepted or not accepted, total accepted, and their tracking sheet. And then this is where they sign it off. So that very quickly is the documentation. Questions, comments? Anybody?
I'm happy with the whole presentation and thank you so much. I'm not sure if when I encounter any other problems while compiling that, can we make contact with you before we submit?
Please contact me or contact Angelique. What Angelique will do is that as you start submitting evidence and your workbook onto Dropbox, she will monitor it. And if it's obvious that she's not an evaluator, so she's not going to evaluate it, but she will track and say, hang on, I see you've only given me 4 examples.
Okay.
Just looking at your example, it doesn't look to me like you've actually done a clear description. Now, she will give you kind of a surface level face look at what you're submitting, so that before it goes to the evaluator, because you don't want to waste an evaluation opportunity, you only get 2. Okay.
Yes.
She will just give you a kind of a surface level look. I think you've got enough evidence, or I don't think you've got enough evidence. She'll also look at it and say, listen, please, your evidence is in a mess. Number it more clearly, or so she'll give you that sort of very basic guidelines. If you have a question on that, please contact me.
Okay. Noted with many thanks.
Dennis, how are you doing? And Nirvana, how are you? Are you guys okay?
Yes, I think from my side, I'm covered. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have kind of done all my groundwork in terms of putting all my evidence into one folder. And I have started completing the portfolio of evidence workbook. So it's just a matter of linking the evidence, obviously, to the outcomes that is required. So yes, I'm covered. Thank you.
Nirvana, where are you?
Well, lost in the beginning, but it all seems a bit clear now. However, would there be like, would I be made available to the recording so I can watch from the beginning?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
We will be adding it to our YouTube channel, but I will be sending you guys a link to it as well.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else for today? I'm aware that we're over time. Okay, everybody's quiet. I take it then that everything is good. Thanks, everyone, and good luck, and keep in touch with us.
Sure. Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for this.
everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Bye.